Grim to the brim to the brim.
I like that. Grim to the brim. Hello and welcome all in, you grimmers and brimmers, to Grim to the Brim, the podcast where we pull apart Grimm's fairy tales. You're here with me, Kiet Pian Potts, and my co-hosts.
Davy Mustard Face.
And
This week I am Andy Gumby Mickle.
Wow.
I thought that sounded like a grim fairy tale name. What do you think?
Andy Gumbernickel.
Andy, did you
Gumby
say
Mickle?
Gumby Nickel?
Yeah,
Like, only this week, though.
only this week. I think I'll try a different one.
Are you going
'cause
to be a different one every week?
I'll try something that sounds properly grim.
You need to come up with a different name every week. You've set a thing now.
We should all do it.
So, this week we've got another long story, which means we're going to wheel out that old harp again.
Beautiful.
Oh, I love it. And she does that live every week.
Well, yeah, she's here. I mean, she's had to quietly
Yeah, I
leave.
was going to say she comes over. Thanks, Jen. Should I begin?
Go right ahead. Wait, one sec. Let's get Jen back in for a sec. Come back one more time.
Okay, so this story is called The Three Snake Leaves. There was once a man who was so poor he could hardly earn enough to keep himself and his son from starving. One day, the boy said to him, "Dear father, I see you going about every day looking so sad and tired that I'm determined to go out into the world and try to earn my own living." So his father gave him his blessing and took leave of him with many tears. Just at this time, a great king was going to war with the king of another country, and the youth took service under him and marched to the battlefield as a soldier. In the first conflict with the enemy, he was in great danger and had a wonderful escape, for his comrades fell on each side of him. Their commander also was wounded, and several were inclined to take flight and run from the field. But the youth stepped forth to raise their courage and cried, "No, no! We will never allow our fatherland to sink to the ground." Then they took courage and quickly followed their young leader, who led them forward, attacked, and quickly vanquished the enemy. When the king heard to whom he owed this great victory, he sent for the youth, raised him to a position of great honour, gave him great treasures, and made him the first in the kingdom next to himself. Now the king had a daughter who was very beautiful, but she was also very whimsical. She'd made a vow she would take no man for a husband who did not promise that if she should die, he would allow himself to be buried with her in the grave.
Oh, here we go.
If he loves me, she said, he will not wish to outlive me.
There's always something.
Yeah, I mean, I knew something was coming. I thought that this guy's got it all going on. His life's going really well. Met a nice girl. What's the catch? What's the Grimm's catch? Here we go.
In return for this, she would also promise to be buried in the grave with her spouse, should he die first.
No, it's not that unreasonable. She's in on it as well.
They've got to be buried alive.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's commitment, isn't it?
That's what a marriage is.
Mm.
It's love. This strange vow had hitherto frightened away all wooers.
Wooers.
Wooers, yes.
Like the way you say it.
Wooers, 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 wooers.
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 Woo, 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 woo. He disregarded the vow, although her father warned him and said, "Do you know what a terrible promise you will have to make?" "Yes," replied the young man. "I must be buried with her in the grave if I outlive her, but my love for her is so strong that I disregard that danger." Then the king gave his consent, and the marriage was celebrated with great pomp. After they had lived together for some time in great happiness and contentment, the young queen was seized with a terrible illness, from which her physicians were unable to restore her. As she lay dead, the young husband remembered what he'd promised her, and the thought of lying in the grave alive filled him with horror. But there was no escape. The king placed a watch at every outlet from the castle, so it was not possible to avoid his fate. When the day of the funeral arrived, and the body had been carried down and placed in the royal vault, he was taken there also, and the door firmly fastened with locks and bolts.
So he can't sneak out.
It's her random rule. You will follow it.
She's dead. I let him off.
You said you were going to be buried alive with her? You're going to be buried alive with her. No backsies.
It's stupid that. Where did she come up with that? Was it just like a random? Well, she was whimsical, as you said. Like, okay, great. So everyone has to suffer.
And to be fair, the king did warn the soldier, so he knew what was coming.
How young was she? Because like her father's still alive and well.
Doesn't say.
No,
No, age of death is apparently not vital to the story.
I'm gonna say 43.
Okay. Near to the coffin stood a table upon which there were 4 lights, 4 loaves of bread, 4 bottles of wine, and when he knew that when these provisions came to an end he must starve, so he seated himself, feeling full of grief and sorrow, but with a determination to take only a small piece of bread and the least drop of wine to make them last.
Wait, sorry, what was the food for? Just to keep him alive longer?
Yeah, to prolong his suffering and misery.
Drag it out for months.
What's the point of that?
Maybe the king thinks that he's doing him a favour.
Yeah, he wasn't an unreasonable
You'd
king.
just neck all 4 bottles of wine, wouldn't you? You'd just pass out and die of alcohol poisoning.
I'll be getting blackout drunk.
I would just be like, all right, sword to the heart, in I go.
Yeah.
I don't think I could deal with that. Slowly starving.
See what was in the vault. Like there might be a Rubik's Cube or something, you know.
Is that how you want to spend your last days?
Well, what else am I going to do?
Good point.
Drink wine, eat bread.
Yeah, I'd do that on day one, to be fair. I would do that anyway. But, like, you know, if there was nothing else, like, and I couldn't escape, well, the wine would be going immediately. And then it wouldn't be a thing where I'd be like, well, let's see if I can push it for another 6 months because it's just so sweet down here. Just, you know, burn out.
Just taking little tiny sips and little tiny nibbles.
Oh, I had another lovely day today. I had 4 sips of wine and a slice of bread. And I watched my wife rot some more.
One day, when death seemed nearer than ever, he saw from a corner of the vault just opposite to where he sat a white snake creep out and approach the body. He rose in horror, thinking it was about to gnaw it, and drawing his sword, exclaimed, as with 2 blows he cut the snake into 3 pieces. "As long as I live, you shall not touch that." After a while, a second snake crept out of the corner, but as soon as he saw the other lying dead in 3 pieces, he went back and quickly returned with 3 green leaves in his mouth. Then he took the 3 separate portions of the snake, placed them together, and laid a leaf on each wound. And no sooner were they joined than the snake raised himself as lively as ever and went away hastily with his companion. Do you think this is the same? The leaves were coated in the salve that them surgeons used to glue their own hands back on.
These are the 3 surgeons. They turned into snakes. For a laugh, for a bet.
One of the snakes was cut into pieces. Didn't he say something?
You're not going to chew on this body.
Yeah.
The body of my dead wife who's having me suffer
Oh,
here with her.
he was talking to the snakes.
It was a pretty one-sided conversation, as it often is with
Yeah.
snakes.
Sorry, I thought the snakes were talking to him there.
The leaves remained lying on the ground, and as he looked at them, the thoughts of the poor unfortunate man were full of the wonderful properties they possessed, and it suddenly occurred to him that a leaf which could restore a dead snake to life might be useful to human beings. He stopped and picked up the leaves, then advancing softly towards the body, he laid one on the mouth of the dead and the others on both the eyes. In a moment he saw the effect of what he'd done. The blood began to circulate in the veins and blushed softly in the pale face and lips of his dead wife. She drew a deep breath, opened her closed eyes, and exclaimed faintly, "Where am I?" "You are with me, dear wife," answered her husband, and he told her all that had happened and how he had wakened her to life. After taking a little of the wine and bread, she became stronger and was able to rise from the bier and walked to the door of the vault with her husband. Here they knocked and called loudly for a time, till at last the watchman heard them and word was sent to the king. He came himself very quickly and ordered the door of the vault to be opened. How astonished and joyful he was to find them both alive and uninjured, and to know that his anxiety was over. The whole matter had been a great trouble to him.
There must have been a moment there where the king was thinking, he's just doing an impression. Right.
Yeah.
I love how the king's daughters died and he's entombed her husband, his son-in-law, in the vault with the body, and all it gave him was mild anxiety.
Like, he's also got people guarding it, like, yeah, I've entombed him. I'm waiting for him to... I don't know, how long are they going to be on guard there? Like, how long before they know he's dead? It doesn't really make a sound when you die.
Yeah, I like that. He agreed. He made this deal that he'd ring a little bell before he passed, just so the guards knew. Yeah, I just feel like that would be the first thing I'd think to do, to sort of sneak back out again. Would be like, oh shit, she's alive again. Look, she's gotten better. Look at this. You can open the door now.
The 3 leaves the young prince took with him and gave them to a servant to take care of, saying, "Preserve them carefully for me, and see that they are safe every day. Who knows what help they may be to us in any future trouble." A great change appeared in the wife of the young prince after this event. It was as if with her return to life, all her love for her husband had vanished from her heart. Not long after, he wished to take a voyage across the sea to see his old father, and she accompanied him. While they were on board the ship, she forgot all the true and great love he had shown her in trying to restore her to life when she was dead, and made friends with the captain, who who was as wicked as herself. One day, when the young prince lay asleep on deck, she called the skipper to her and told him to take her husband by the feet while she raised his head, and before he was awake enough to save himself, these two wicked people threw him overboard into the sea. As soon as this shameful deed was accomplished, she said to the skipper, "Now let us sail home again, and say that the prince has died on the voyage. I will praise and extol you so greatly to my father that I know he will readily give his consent to our marriage, and leave the crown to you after his death." The faithful servant to whom the prince had entrusted the wonderful leaves saw all that his master's wife had done. Unnoticed, he lowered one of the boats from the ship's side, got on board, and very soon discovered the body of the prince. Dragging it hastily into the boat, he rowed away, and soon left the traitors far behind. As soon as he safely felt out of sight, produced the precious leaves which he always carried about with him, laid one on each eye and one on the mouth of the dead man, who very quickly showed signs of life, and was at last sufficiently restored to help him in rowing the boat. They both rowed with all their strength day and night, and their little bark flew so swiftly over the waves that they arrived at the king's palace long before the daughter and the captain. The king wondered greatly when he saw his son-in-law and the servant enter, and asked them what had happened. But when he heard of his daughter's wickedness, he said, "I can scarcely believe she would act so basely. However, the truth will soon be brought to light. For the present, I advise you both to hide yourselves in a private chamber, and make yourselves quite at home till the ship returns." The master and servant took the king's advice, and a few days afterwards the large ship made its appearance, and the king's guilty daughter appeared before her father with a sorrowful countenance. "Why have you come back alone?" he said. "Where is your husband?" "Ah, dear father," she replied, "I come home to you in great sorrow, for during the voyage my husband was taken suddenly ill and died. And if the good captain had not stood by me and conducted me home, I cannot tell what evil might have happened to me. He stood by my husband's deathbed, and he can tell you all that occurred." "Oh," said the king, "I can restore your dead husband to life again, so do not grieve any longer." He threw open the door of the private room as he spoke, and told his son and the servant to come out. When the wife saw her husband, she was thunderstruck, and sank on her knees imploring mercy. "I can show you no mercy," said the king. "Your husband was not only ready to be buried and die with you, but he used the means which restored you to life, and you have murdered him while he slept, and shall receive the reward you so truly merit." Then was she with her accomplice placed in a boat full of holes, and driven out to sea, where they were soon overwhelmed in the waves and drowned. The end.
Fuck, I knew it was going to be abrupt. I knew it was going to be just that Grimm's abruptness.
It was a happy ending, though, wasn't it? That's nice.
Well, not for the princess.
There's some justice.
He was quite happy to be buried alive with her, and then brought her back to life, and then she was like, "Oh, I don't fancy you anymore, really, though. This captain's a bit of alright." And she said she chucked him overboard to kill him, and then, ba-da! His servant brings him back to life.
I thought it was all going to go a bit like Jeremy Kyle at the end, but it didn't. It just, okay, let's just get her drowned, thanks.
Yeah, the king wasn't even
That's,
despondent.
like, what's the servant even doing there in the final scene? How did the servant know about those leaves?
He just said look after them. He didn't tell
He
them how
did,
they
yeah.
worked.
But he knew. He knew to put them on his eyes and his mouth.
Be a bit like disorientating, like dead for a few weeks and then suddenly you're alive. That would probably mess you up a bit.
You don't really know, like the princess comes back and she's completely different. Are we even sure it was the same princess that came back?
Maybe it was a demon.
Are women demons? Is that what this story's about?
The Grimm's going to get cancelled.
How come all of these stories are just terribly sexist?
It's like times have changed over the last 500 years.
Yeah.
I feel like the moral of the story is make sure that you keep your wife entertained on a regular basis, or she'll get bored of you and throw you into the sea and drown you.
That's one way to put it. Maybe be a bit more reasonable about like what you ask of your partner before you get married, because it'll backfire if you're going to be that whimsical, quote unquote. That's not how I would. If you look up whimsical, and like that's a dark example of like a random thought that you could have.
Yeah, you're whimsical.
Whimsical, it seems to, for me, it's a nice word, and it means you just do fun things, and you maybe get some panpipes and go running in a field because you feel like it.
God, women, eh?
I know, right?
You am I right, David?
I forgot what your name was at the beginning.
It's Gumby Mickle.
Gumby Mickle, you're going to get cancelled again. Again.
Yeah, I'm going all in this week. But I mean, that's what all these stories kind of feel like. They almost feel a bit like a bitter reaction to like the happy fairy tales, the things where the princess and the beautiful woman marries the beautiful man, and it's like the bitter reaction from the ugly men who are like, fucking hell, women are rubbish, aren't they? They never want me.
Fairy tales that had proper happy endings were never a thing. I think these stories were the the originals, and
Is that a
then
Disney thing? Just ruined
Disney
them?
sweetened
it's
them
a
all.
Disney thing that's just ruined it. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, someone must have come up with a happy story, like in the history of human civilization. I think there's been one.
Well, maybe they just read all the Grimm's ones and went, "Here's a thought. What if nobody dies at the end?" And they're like, "Whoa, hold the phone. Everybody has to die at the end. That's how a story goes. You can't write a story without everybody dying at the end. It's the rules." And they're like, "What if we change the rules? What if we change the rules so that nobody died and, wait for it, everybody lived fucking happily ever after?" Would that blow everybody's mind? And they're like, "That's actually, we could probably make a company."
How would you boys like to pay off your mortgages? Hey, make the stories a little bit happier at the end.
Yeah, basically.
The thing is, like, when you're watching any Disney film, it's like you get a bit stressed because obviously that's the story arc. It's like, oh shit, it's all going wrong. And then it's like, I'll just go get a mince pie and chill because I know they're going to write this at the end. With Grimm's, it's sort of like, and it was fucking brutal. The end. That's it. They just stop it right there. Like, you'd be choking on your mince pie after one bite because you just don't get the time for everything to resolve nicely.
They don't resolve at all. Like, there's
No.
Give it some time, a bit of breathing space.
I think they're just like, you're bored now at the end.
Real to the Breal.
Real to the Breal is a segment in which we take real life stories that have really happened to us and we write them in the Grimm's fairy tale style. So have you got your Real to the Breal ready there, Andy?
I do. This story is called The Mighty Mice. Once upon a past, there lived some mice. It was definitely the past because the mice all lived in little wooden huts and there were no roads, just grass and mud. You could also tell because there were lots of kings and queens larking about, tossing their crowns into the air or whatever it was they all did back then. In fact, there were so many royals about that you should imagine there's always a yawning prince or a well-dressed horse keeping an eye on you throughout this story.
I thought you were going to say a well-dressed whore, and then that would have made sense. But as soon as the s came out at the end, I was like, a well-dressed horse, and then I just pictured a horse in a dress.
In the real version, it would be a well-dressed whore. But in Grimm's times, it was a horse.
Of course.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
okay.
These mice were like as big as people, and they could stand and walk about like we do. They could even talk or do other human things like marry or eat chips. They all lived in a town called Mouston in County Mouse, and the Lord of County Mouse was Lord Mouse, the 337th, and at this time in Mouston there was a tradition for the young male mice to offer the Lord a gift to prove they had come of age. On the outskirts of Mouston, deep in the forest of Mousewood, there lived a tall and thin creature that the villagers called Howard. Howard was an ageless and mustachioed forest giant that spent his days effortlessly gliding through the woodland, foraging in his straight necktie and high-waisted drainpipe trousers. He could be easily identified as he passed by the characteristic tapping of his massive silver hammer against the trees and the sound that followed of the startled birds voiding their bowels in unison. Birds don't fart, so here you can just imagine something that sounds a bit like rain, but where the rainwater is like a milky black syrup. Howard loved the forest and everything found within. He was a master crafts creature capable of turning the wood of the trees or the stones of the earth into long-lasting tools or astounding works of art. Anything Howard created in the forest was of such great beauty that upon discovery by the villagers of Mouston, they were highly sought after and prized above all else. So it didn't take long before Howard himself became entwined in the young mice of Mouston's rite of passage. In the beginning, the young mice would sneak into the forest and steal the crafts Howard had made, returning them to the village, proclaiming they defeated the giant. But when Howard started to catch the mice in the act, he would chase them away with his hammer, creating a terrible mess throughout the forest. This destruction pained Howard, and eventually, albeit reluctantly, he was forced to begin locking his creations inside his workshop. But the young mice kept coming. They kept trying to break into the workshop, until finally, Howard left his forest and made a deal with the Lord. He, being a rational creature, agreed to teach the young mice and to help them create their own gifts from the woodland, if in turn the villagers would respect his forest home. The Lord agreed. And so, for generations, The young mice would be sent out into the woods to craft the best gift they could. Over time, it was only natural that Howard would get worn out by this relationship. He became exhausted by the constant need to inspire the young mice, and by the constant battle to keep a watchful eye on them. Before long, Howard realized that it would be much easier to manage if he taught the young mice to all make the same thing. And since Howard was beginning to understand the importance of his relationship with the mice in also teaching them the ways of the forest, he decided that the gift should be a symbol of this union, a rather literal one. With inevitability, the mighty mouse was born. A mouse crafted from the wood of the forest, one that each of the mice would build to the same specifications. Even the Lord was relieved with this arrangement. It meant that they too no longer had to feign a great interest in the gifts and could spend more time getting married and eating chips. But while each of the wooden mice were identical, or as close as the students could manage, there was one thing that Howard kept special and kept unique. One part of the build of the Mighty Mouse that was different for each one. The small, glittery berries of the giant hibblegift tree. The hibbleberries were so special to Howard because they were so rare. The snow-topped hibblegift trees on top of Hibblegift Mountain only produced them once every 10 years. And when they did, the berries were a different color to the ones that had arrived a decade before. In all his years, Howard had never seen 2 batches of berries that were the same color. Every 10 years, when the spring came, Howard would take only 2 of the new batch of fragile berries for his collection, striding quickly back to his workshop to keep them safe in a little cold cave in the back of his workshop. The entrance just large enough to fit his hand inside, but big enough for a human-sized mouse to enter. Howard had been collecting the hibbleberries for eons, every possible color preserved by the cold for eternity behind a little locked door. Here you should probably imagine lots of Skittles inside a fridge. Allowing the young mice to collect their favorite color of hibbleberry from the cave felt like a reward to Howard too. He always stressed the importance of the natural gifts of the forest upon the young mice, for to him, learning to respect nature was the real meaning of Mighty Mouse. Collecting the hibbleberries from the cave was the last step of the process. The hibbleberries would be quickly varnished before they warmed and placed as the eyes of the wooden Mighty Mouse, to symbolize the young builder's awakening. On and on this practice went, and everyone was happy. That was until a young mouse by the name of Gumby Mickle. As usual, Howard was gliding around the workshop, tapping his silver hammer against all the workbenches, making sure the young mice were listening, following the instructions perfectly, and not getting up to any mischief. A few of the students had already finished their build, and Gumby Mickle had watched as they called over to the giant and asked him if it was okay for them to collect their hibbleberries. "Excuse me, Master Howard. May I please be allowed into the cave to collect my eyes?" they would say, and Howard would unlock the little door into the cool cave. The mice would enter, closing the door behind themselves to keep the cold in, and pick their favorite color as quick as they could by candlelight. When they were done and came out shivering and in awe of their chosen berries, Howard would lock the door again and place the key back into a pocket of his long trousers. This worried Gumby Mickle, because he was a shy mouse. He did not like drawing attention to himself in this way. The noise of the workshop was such that he would have to raise his voice, and he was already feeling intimidated by the giant and that ever-present tapping of his ridiculous silver hammer. He would much rather just get on with building his Mighty Mouse without having to interact with the giant in any way. What kind of giant is so fascinated by berries anyway? To him it was absurd. So, when Howard forgot to lock the door after the last mouse had left the cave, Gumby Mickle seized his opportunity. Quickly, he entered the cave, leaving the door open so he could see as best he could. He snatched at the first set of berries he saw and darted back out of the cave to his workbench, relieved that it was over. Unfortunately, whilst no one had noticed his deception, they had also not noticed that he had left the door to the cave wide open. Gumby Mickle was pleased. He applied the finishing touches to his Mighty Mouse, varnishing the cold berries to prevent them rotting, and waited, nodding off slightly in the warm cacophony of the busy workshop. Some time passed, and then Howard spotted the cave door swinging ajar. It was too late. He galloped over to the door, knelt, and reached inside. The hibbleberries he pulled out were now all the same colour, a milky black syrup. They had all been completely spoiled by the warm air. Howard flew into a rage. He banged his silver hammer against all the walls, demanding to know who had caused his hibbleberries to be ruined in this way. Had they no respect? No one answered. Gumby Mickle was too cowardly to say a word. He thought that if he stayed quiet, then no one could get in trouble. Howard looked around the room at the startled mice. He couldn't tell by looking which mouse had ruined the hibbleberries. They were all such lying, cowering little bastards, he thought. He should have known they would eventually deceive him again. Taking a deep breath, Howard calmly walked over to the door of the workshop and locked it with another key from his long trousers. Then he lifted his silver hammer and brought it down, one by one, onto the heads of each of the young mice. After he had finished splattering the innards of the young mice's heads against the walls of his workshop, Howard strode out and into the forest. His silver hammer still waved aloft, and he marched aggressively into the village of Mouston, squishing the heads of all the mice that got in his way. Finding Mouston Hall, he tore the roof off and spotted the Lord hiding under a table. Typical, thought Howard, and he smashed his hammer down on top of it, narrowly missing the Lord's body, but managing to trap them by their tail. Howard grabbed a hold of the Lord with his free hand and lifted him into the air, before squeezing them so tightly that their little mousy eyes popped out of their head. For this finale, you can imagine pushing Play-Doh through a little hole, but instead the hole is a mouse's face. The end.
Nice abruptness at the end.
So, did you leave the kiln door open in art class and your art teacher went fucking nuts, or were you taking cookery classes and you left the oven open and the fucking tarts were ruined?
The workshop is true, and the Mighty Mouse is also true. These were things we made, but what I did and what I remember doing was taking the little plastic eye things from a little box on the teacher's desk, and then not admitting that I'd opened the little box and took the eyes. Little cheap little plastic little things that meant nothing to nobody except to Howard.
They clearly meant a lot to him. Did he kill everybody in your class?
Yeah, everyone but me. Yeah, I was lucky. I hid under the table, but he missed me with his hammer.
Was it a wood shop or something?
I think it was all boys woodworking class, but I don't remember that well. But it's always stuck with me, that shame of like not admitting to what I'd done.
That got the rest of your classmates killed, each and every one of them.
Well, it wasn't the whole class that was punished. It was more a case of, it was like one person was singled out. What I think I remember happening was, and I don't know if this is right, but he might have gone to the box first and opened it and I just followed afterwards, which gets me off the hook. But if that was the case, I don't think I would feel this bad about it all these years still. So I might have been the first in and then maybe left it near the person that was then really singled out for it. But even when it was singled out, it was a case of, oh, this kid is the class troublemaker. So it was easier for the teacher to blame this kid, and it was easier for this kid to take the blame.
If it makes you feel any better, I think the teacher went on fucking stupid and over the top about something quite minor, and I think that's a thing that teachers do. So don't blame yourself for that. They've been an asshole.
It's an odd thing. Like I can sort of see it because you're in a workshop and there were power tools. So I think what he was trying to do, if I give him the benefit of the doubt, is kind of keep people in line and teach them the dangers. And this is why you have to listen. If I tell you to do this and you don't do it, you could lose a hand type thing. The hammer thing was real too. He would tap his hand, not against the heads of the children, but against all of the workbenches, sort of like to get attention or to like generally just get you to stop.
Maybe he started with sledgehammers and he just went through too many desks and they were like, listen, you need to stop breaking the desk. I know you're making a point, but something a bit lighter, a bit more,
The
more
children
tap the desk.
must learn.
You've gone through all the desks we have now. We're going to need you to just brain it
Simmer
in a bit.
down.
Yeah, just a tap tap, not a smash, just a tap tap. Just trying to frighten them, not scar them for life. Well, that was traumatic, I would say. If it makes you feel any better, I once burped in a class and the teacher said, "Who was that?" And I said it was my friend, and they totally believed me, and he got detention. And I never owned up to it. So
Wow.
Detention.
he probably died of a heroin
Was it like a
overdose.
really... Oh, Jesus. Yeah, thanks for being there for me, guys. I really appreciate
It's
it.
good to talk through these things.
You're going to wake up a new man.
Bounce out of bed. Fuck you, Howard. You don't control me anymore.
Thanks
For
Listening.
to
the
Podcast.
thank you all for listening. Join us next week for more
Grim to the brim. Grim to the brim.
Grim to the Brim.
Ram to the Ram.
Grim to the Brim.
Ram to the Ram.
Grim to the Brim.
Fuck you, Howard.